Welcome to the Unlist. Today, I have a tale for you. A tale of two Lapidus fragrances. Two fragrances that were designed to be masculine market flagship perfumes for the house of Ted Lapidus. The first of them, released in 1978, would be ultimately a very obscure footnote in the overall history of men's designer fragrance. Released technically at the very height of popularity for the house of Ted Lapidus, but quickly Lapidus would end up having a sour relationship with the licensee cosmetic brand that would create this fragrance. And by 1983, the show was over. So after only about 5 years on the market, this fragrance and all others created for Ted Lapidus by this cosmetic licensee would be discontinued. And the Lapidus house would be without fragrances outside of surviving inventory. Although Ted Lapidus would persevere and strike a new deal with Jacques Bogart, aka Jacques Conquier, who owned the Bogart Group. And the Bogart Group would purchase the license from L'Oreal, but because L'Oreal tend to be, in general, very petty about things, they did not want to transfer the formulas or offer any access to any of that to the Bogart Group. And the Bogart Group were forced to redesign all new fragrances for the house, starting with Creation in 1984. And then eventually we would see, by 1987, a new masculine flagship fragrance launch called Lapidus Pour Homme. Not to be confused with the previous effort, which was just called Pour Homme, right? Pour Homme was the title. Pour Homme by Ted Lapidus, 1978. That was created by the previous licensee, who I will get to in a second. That fragrance only had a 5-year production run, so didn't sell very well, is quite rare, has always been quite rare. It's never been something that you could get in a lot of places. Don't think of it as, oh, this was plentiful and everybody bought it up. That was never the case. It's always been a bit of a rare bird, a bit of a lark. After a 5-year run, it ceased to be. And then in 87, it saw ostensibly a replacement in 87, Lapidus Pour Homme, where Lapidus was now part of the name. It was Lapidus Pour Homme by Ted Lapidus versus just Pour Homme by Ted Lapidus. Those of you who know your Lapidus history will know that Lapidus Pour Homme ended up becoming one of the best-selling fragrances, not just for the house of Ted Lapidus, but probably for all of the Bogart Group. Lapidus Pour Homme is the cash cow, and Lapidus is probably the biggest division that Jacques Bogart owns in regards to its fragrance portfolio. Now, what's especially funny about this is, due to the hand-over-foot success of Lapidus Pour Homme, Jacques Bogart made so much money that they offered to buy the entire house. And they would do so in 1989, when Ted Lapidus would actually hand the business over to his son, Oliver Lapidus, who would then do what most rich, spoiled, kids born into exorbitant wealth and having no responsibility or, never having to do anything, lift a finger for themselves. What do? They take the family business and they immediately sell it to a corporate interest and then go off and be playboys for the rest of their lives. Do lines of coke, screw women, whatever. Okay? Live the life of Riley, as my father used to say. Cough, cough, Erwin Creed, cough, same thing. Sold to BlackRock, and then BlackRock sold to Kering. Anyway, my point is that kind of happened. And when that happened, the house of Ted Lapidus fully became the property of the Bogart Group. And that could not have happened without the overwhelming success of Lapidus Pour Homme. So here we have two different iterations, two different takes on the same concept. One extremely obscure and utterly failed, and one almost obnoxiously successful, to the point where there are still, to this day, flankers being made of this fragrance. Now, you have the background details. Let's get into it. The first one, and by far the rarer of the two, the one that most of you people are probably not going to know much about until watching this video, is this one right here. The original Pour Homme by Ted Lapidus. Now, the licensee that I was mentioning earlier is none other than the infamous L'Oreal Cosmetics. And you guys are going, oh yeah, L'Oreal, the evil empire, absolutely horrible, you know? And you're right. Now, I want to say that back in the 70s, they weren't quite as big of a company as they are now. And I don't want to necessarily say that they had the same, you know, New World Order conspiratorial mentality that they seem to have these days, where nowadays they want to gobble up every brand they can and assimilate like the Borg. I don't think they quite had that particular domineering, you know, mindset. They weren't like the Mind Flayers from D&D, where they wanted to consume everything in sight. They were just another cosmetics manufacturer, no different than Coty, no different than, well, any brand, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, you name it. L'Oreal was just another one of those, okay? Just another one of those. And in those days, they did treat a lot of their portfolios fairly. I mean, Jacques Fath had a very good run under L'Oreal, okay? Green Water was kept in production, very well shaped it was kept in. There were a lot of brands that were very happy to live under the L'Oreal umbrella in those days. So it kind of made sense for Ted Lapidus to say, sure, L'Oreal, here, make me some fragrances. You know, they weren't this bottom feeder corporate ghoul-led drivel company that they are now, where they got to pump out the same 10 blue fragrances and the same 10 fruit chulis and then slap different labels on them. Okay, this one's Valentino, this one's YSL, this one's Ralph Lauren, this one's Prada. They weren't doing that back then, okay? So rest assured, they were probably still evil to some extent, but we're talking more like maybe the Galactic Republic, like Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. We're not talking like full Return of the Jedi, where it's like Palpatine going with the, you know, with the Force lightning or whatever. It wasn't quite that bad yet. So when this came out, you have to understand the context, the situation in which this fragrance arrived on the scene. So 1978 was probably the apex, like I said, the height of popularity for Ted Lapidus. And unless you know anything about fashion at all, I mean, you would think I would know about fashion, but I do know a little thing here or there. So, plus I also research it for these videos, obviously, so I can give it to you. So in the 70s, Ted Lapidus was really famous for making blue jeans mainstream. Okay, people didn't think of blue jeans as a fashion statement in the 70s. Everybody was wearing slacks. They were wearing like Angel Flight bell bottoms, stuff like that. Dungarees, corduroy. Basic Levi style blue jeans were just commodity. Like white t-shirts, like anything. It was just commodity clothing. You wore it when you went to work or whatever. Okay. But designer blue jeans were really put on the map by Ted Lapidus. Now, Calvin Klein would take it a step further. Calvin Klein would really get the buying public into plain, basic clothes with a designer logo slapped. That's easy mode, right? Lazy mode for some people, but it was a novel concept. However, you have to give credit where credit is due, and Ted Lapidus really put that concept out there before Calvin Klein managed to really popularize it, okay? People like Twiggy, like Alain Delon, like Brigitte Bardot were very into the Ted Lapidus style, which was very sort of rugged, militaristic in some ways, outdoorsy. Like a lot of the clothes were inspired by military uniforms. They were inspired by safari outfits. So like Dr. Livingston, I presume, or Captain Crunch with the epaulets, right? The crunch berries on the shoulder, the buttons and the pockets mounted on the outside of the shirt. That was the Ted Lapidus vibe, okay? That rugged, outdoorsy, militaristic, sort of faux utilitarian with the blue jeans, right? That was the vibe. So that gives you an idea of why this fragrance smells the way it does. Now the bottle is very, you know, 70s modern. Clearly this looks like some kind of prop from Buck Rogers or Space 1999 or what else was out back then, Battlestar Galactica, right? This kind of takes you to one of those TV shows, but that's a bit of a, exception. The smell of this fragrance does not really preclude what the bottle looks like. It doesn't. You have no idea it's going to smell the way it does by looking at this bottle. You think futuristic, chic, extremely modern, sheer, and it's none of those things. It is absolutely, positively none of those things. Even though the market copy, because I actually have a carded sample of this as well. See, here's my carded sample. The market copy on this, and I'm going to read it to you right now actually, because it's kind of funny. The market copy on this says, and I quote, as soon as I can get it open here, it says, an exceptional and original fragrance of incense, wood, leather, and rum. That sounds good, right? Incense, wood, leather, and rum. It is the perfect combination of the French tradition of quality and the American spirit of modernity and boldness. So, I mean, I guess, it's hard to think of anything coming from the 70s as being modern, but I guess at one point in time it sort of kind of was. So there you have it. It's supposed to be an equal share of ruggedness and modernity and quality and all that fun stuff. The reality of the matter is, this is a very hirsute, very masculine chest hair. It fits with the clothing, okay? The ruggedness, the militaristic outdoorsiness. So you're going to get aldehydes. You're going to get very chewy herbs. You're going to get a remarkably buttery, sort of oricey kind of Shalimar-ish note, rubbery, waxy, oricey note. But then you're going to get a whole bunch of leather, castoreum and oak moss all the way, vetiver, cedarwood. I don't get so much of the rum notes that the market copy suggests. I mean, there's a bit of sweetness in there. I feel like there's a bit of spiced sweetness, but I don't get much of an alcoholic vibe. This doesn't feel gourmandy at all. But then again, remember, in 1978, the whole concept of gourmand didn't really exist yet either. So I think rum is just kind of a frou-frou word. It has no real meaning. So don't go into this fragrance thinking you're going to smell like rum, because you're not. What you are going to smell like, though, is a very rugged, rough and tumble sort of rendition of the rich, spiced leather, almost the Russian leather vibe that you would later see in fragrances like Bel Ami by Hermes, released in '86, or Moschino Pour Homme by Moschino in 1990. Those fragrances are much more punchy in the way they explode really on your skin. This is much more buttoned down. So again, it has that rough, leathery sort of feel, but it is not necessarily outspoken about it either. Okay, and the incense is very present here. I definitely get a frankincense vibe in this, a very rich, a very real frankincense vibe in this. And that's it. So as luck would have it, L'Oreal, I guess, didn't sell a whole lot of this. And Lapidus kind of pointed the finger at L'Oreal, saying that you didn't do a good enough job at marketing our fragrances for us. And then L'Oreal said to Ted Lapidus, well, no one likes your clothes. Your brand is not selling that well anymore, so it's your fault. And it ended up being like this bitter sort of sour grapes thing, I guess, and they couldn't meet in the middle. Now, what's really strange is L'Oreal actually didn't market this fragrance in the US themselves. They marketed it only in Europe. So here's probably part of why it failed. L'Oreal handed the reins to Speidel Textron in the US. Okay, Speidel Textron. If you get any of these bottles and you live in the US and you find one of these on US eBay, the label is going to say Speidel Textron. The box is going to say Speidel Textron. And those of you who know what Speidel Textron is, you will know that is the same brand that produced British Sterling in 1965, which is a barbershop fragrance. So they literally took a designer fragrance brand and handed it over to a drugstore distributor. That is equal to, I don't know, Dior or something, handing distribution of one of their fragrances over to Schulten. Imagine when Dior dropped Jules in 1980, okay, that they gave it over to Schulten. Here, Schulten, distribute our fragrance for us in America. We can't be bothered to put it out ourselves in America. You do it for us. So what does Schulten do? What did Speidel Textron do? They threw this fragrance in every drugstore and every general merchandiser, every lowbrow place that average people like us shop. Wasn't in department stores, wasn't in high-end frou-frou exclusive places. It was just in your average, everyday sort of places where people go, where they buy shaving cream, where they buy razor blades, where they buy deodorant. So yeah, it's really no wonder that this fragrance didn't sell too well, because you're taking a fragrance from a high-end fashion label that sells to people like Twiggy and Brigitte Bardot, and you're sticking it in Rite Aid. You're sticking it in like Drug King or whatever, or Duane Reade or something, or Bartell. That's where you're putting it. And you're wondering why nobody bought it. You're like, oh, what happened? I mean, really? Shall I go on? No. Okay. So now, this fragrance, Lapidus Pour Homme. This one doesn't require anywhere near as much discussion. You pretty much already know the deal with this. So, Jacques Bogart in general is a fragrance house that likes to make very loud, very extroverted, very gregarious, to put it mildly, fragrances. I mean, going all the way back to One Man Show from 1980, 2 years after this appeared, and, you know, on up from there. They like to make fragrances that effectively announce themselves and announce the wearer, I guess, too. And they extended that vibe to the other brands that they had under their control. So when the Bogart Group also had the license for Balenciaga, they did a similar thing when they released Ho Hong Club in 1987. Same year as this, actually. Ho Hong Club was very atypical for your usual Balenciaga style. People were used to Balenciaga fragrances being a little more mature, like the original Ho Hong was mature. Portos was fairly mature smelling, right? And then Ho Hong Club was very sweet, very fruity, lots of carnation, patchouli, very loud, right? Very, you know, go-getter type of beast mode, what the kids would call it now, beast mode, right? Ho Hong Club was very beast mode. Well, this is the same way. Very fruity, very sweet, lots of carnation, pineapple, okay, lots of sweetness. You get this honeyed sort of effect here, a beeswax effect similar to Antaeus, all right? You get civet, so you get that animalic musk note. You get the patchouli. You get the oak moss. This is a very big, loud fragrance, and it's not particularly masculine, because by 1987, things were a little different than they were in 1978. Like I said, in 1978, guys had the sideburns down to here, or they had the mutton chops, they had the handlebars, okay, they had the long feathered hair, you know, like Kurt Russell, the pointed collars. They were doing the Burt Reynolds thing, you know, they had the real skinny jeans with the ass stuck out, but then all the chest hair and the medallions and all the gold bracelets and stuff, right? They were looking very manly, like they were going to punch you out. Mr. T with all the gold chains. That's where we were in 78, okay? But by 87, it was the exact opposite of that. 87, all the guys had perms, they had makeup on, they had eyeshadow, they had lipstick. They were all like this. You know, hair metal, Bon Jovi, bunch of neon, bunch of day glow. You know, guys were wearing zebra print pants, they were wearing leopard spots, they had frilly fringe jackets. They were just, you know, it was a time to be alive. And I was a kid back then, and I remember all the music videos on MTV, so I know very well how people dressed, okay? You had the punks with the neon hair and the big mohawks. So the last thing anybody really wanted was a very super oily, super rich, ultra machismo kind of fragrance that wasn't going to sell very well, at least not to young people. Now, your dad and your granddad and your uncle might have bought something like this in 87, right? But if you were coming of age, if you were in your late teens or your early 20s in 87, you weren't going to buy this. You wanted something more like this. You were not so much Burt Baccarat. You were Sebastian Bach. You were not so much Foghat as you were Skid Row, okay? You were Winger, okay? This is what you were doing. You were Poison in 87. Or maybe you were Boy George or Pete Burns from Dead or Alive. That was your vibe, okay? If you weren't playing air guitar, then you were playing keyboard. But you get my point. That's where we were stylistically in 87. So these two really couldn't be more night and day from each other. They really couldn't. This is like, you know, extra male, manly maleness. You know, this thing could almost be shaped like a phallus, and it would be pretty appropriate, right? This, on the other hand, is kind of like Rocky Horror Picture Show, but in a cool Art Deco, looking like some kind of skyscraper, right? Looking like an 80s skyscraper. That's what this is doing. And, you know, honestly, my style and my vibe, I reach for this more, I'm not going to lie. But in terms of just being unique and fun, this one definitely has a place. But before I wrap this up, the video is getting a little long. I do want to make a note about rarity and expense. A lot of people tend to smell what's not there. When they smell a fragrance they know is rare, they know is expensive, hard to come by, particularly old, particularly deep vintage. And it's almost as if they can smell the rarity, as if the rarity itself has a scent that they can detect on their nose when they spray the fragrance. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You are delusional. Once again, you need to check yourself in for an evaluation. Okay, maybe get yourself looked at. That is definitely not a thing. All right, so a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, this is superior, hands down. This is the greatest lost masterpiece that mankind has ever perceived. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but the sales would like to differ with you, good sir. Clearly, both of these were made available to the general public. Maybe this one should have been in Macy's a little more and not so much in Duane Reade or Bartell Drugs, right? That was a mistake for sure. But to say that either of these weren't commonly available when they first were released is incorrect. And that people didn't have the same opportunities to buy them is incorrect. It's just, as it turns out, a lot more people like this one than they like this one. So if you want to go by sheer numbers alone, then I hate to say it, but I'm guessing, you know, you run the numbers and it comes back, this one ended up being better. And which one do I like more? Well, I like the big, loud, fruity stuff. I like the big 80s patchoulis and the big civet fragrances anyway. I'm a big fan of Koros, right? I'm a big fan of Furio by Bogart. I'm a big fan of all of that loud, obnoxious stuff. So I will take this any day of the week. But I still do enjoy a nice brown leather boot, a nice leather belt, a nice, you know, BGs on the turntable with the mirror ball going. Type of fragrance, I do appreciate that. I have a place in my heart for that, so I do like having this as well. There you guys go. Hopefully you enjoyed it. This is my tale of two Lapidus fragrances. Walk away more educated, more enlightened, and entertained. And this has been the Unlist. Thanks for watching.